Hi, everybody. I'm Clyde Lewis, and welcome to Channel Zero. We're doing this again, and we're working the kinks out. And so this is another episode that we're going to kind of an experiment to see how it works. And very happy to be here to give you my commentary on what's going on in the world other than what I talk about on Ground Zero. And, I find it difficult in these times to actually find stories that certainly apply to everyday living without having to stumble upon what the mainstream is talking about with regard to COVID-19 and the politics we're in the middle of right now, the election cycle. And the difficult thing is that when you look at some of these mainstream networks, you see, hate Trump, hate Trump, hate Trump, and then you have the COVID-19 death tolls. This is something that I'm noticing with the packed journalism that happens in this country, that we're all falling into this trap of being afraid of COVID-19 and then being told how to vote. And I've been noticing also on the internet people showing their ballots and saying, look who I voted for. And, the secret ballot was there for a reason. And I think that actually adds to, voter fraud and tinkering. But that's another story altogether. I don't want to get into the politics of the day because they just seem to be more depressing and more confusing. But I do want to address something that really has been bothering me. And it all started back when the other day I take a Lyft car to work, and I used to be able to take the bus to work, but I'm just afraid with all of the COVID spread that I'd probably catch a disease from some of the urine-soaked homeless people that show up on my bus every day. I basically said to the driver, because I got into the car. And we're driving down the road, and it's been cold here. I mean, the cold has set in early in Portland. And I said to the driver, excuse me, but could you roll up the window? And he says to me, no, the rules are that we need to get the air circulating in here according to, I guess the Lyft rules. You're supposed to wear a mask, and of course the drivers are supposed to put you in the back seat of the car, and they're supposed to keep the windows cracked because they need the fresh air in there. It's the rules. And I said, I hope Lyft decides to change their rules for the winter because people like me, I get cold easy because of circulation situations and everything else in the body. And I'm sure most people don't appreciate having cold, frigid air blowing on them as they're riding down the road. And he said, well, COVID-19. I said, yeah, here's something about COVID-19. And I gave him my argument. I said, we can't say with any certainty what the future of COVID-19 will be. And I think that it's important that we realize this. I think it's important that when we have people like Tickle Me Fauci or Dr. Strangeglove on TV saying, well, this is what we need to do. We can't have Thanksgiving or we can't have this. This has got to end. It's got to end because based on our experience with other infections that we know of now, there's little reason to believe that the coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 or whatever they want to call it is going to go away anytime soon. It's not. And even when vaccines become available, it's not going to cure the virus. And so instead of continuing telling us that there's a pandemic, I think that the realistic scenario should be that they add COVID-19 to the large and growing family of infections that we deal with every day. And see, this is where we call it endemic instead of pandemic. It's endemic to the human population to have COVID-19. Plain and simple. With the worldwide spread of the disease increasing again, so we're told, it seems unlikely that the currently available measures can do more than bring that spread under control, except in countries that can effectively isolate themselves from the outside world. The fact that the vast majority of people are still susceptible to some degree means that there is sufficient fuel for the fire to keep burning for quite some time. And there's sufficient fuel to the fire of these politicians, whoever they may be, to continue their control on people. And I have said this before. I have said the information that we're getting is primarily because these governors, these mayors want to retain their control. And if we tell them no more control, they're going to say, no, we decide. Perfect example is when Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan decided that she wanted to ask for more emergency funds for her state. And the Supreme Court said, no, And I'd say no, too, because they're more than happy to cash the checks they get from the government. But when it comes to cooperating with the government, when it comes to enforcing the laws, they don't do it. And if they don't do it, they don't deserve the money. And so when we look at, I guess you could say, specific locations, a lot of locations already, and these are countries outside of the United States, of course. These countries have reached what is called herd immunity. And we don't get told this because, it's not clear ever in our news organizations. They never give us a clear picture of what the herd immunity ratio is for our area of the world. But we're noticing that the herd immunity ratio is certainly being achieved in other parts of the world. And so when a sufficient number of people become immune to a disease, either through vaccination or if they get infected and they survive, the spread starts to slow down and the number of cases gradually decrease. That's common sense. So keeping us indoors, keeping us from associating with one another, it's just not working. It's obvious that it's not working. I've said many times, you hear the phrase Donald Trump lied and people died. That seems to be this phrase I hear bannering around. No, we complied and nearly 200,000 people died. Yet they'll say, oh, no, people aren't complying. But see, that's the thing. This whole idea of lockdown, this whole idea of wearing masks, this whole idea of doing what we're doing, sure, it's great for hygiene, it's common sense, we should be caring for other people, but it doesn't mean that it's going to disappear instantly or completely, that COVID-19 is with us for a long period of time. Outside any areas with population immunity, there are likely to be plenty of locations that will still have enough susceptible individuals to keep the transmission ongoing for a long period of time. No measure of isolation is so strong that it will completely stop human interaction between regions within and between countries or globally. We can't shut down travel. We can't shut down industry. We can't shut down a lot of things. And yes, it's taught us that some of the things that we should have done earlier with the internet, that we should have allowed telecommuting, we should have allowed online schools and online colleges. In fact, there was a time in my career where I was a college advisor for an online school. And so I was very much for the idea of online learning. I mean, if you can't get away to a brick and mortar college, there's nothing wrong with the idea of going to college online. There's nothing wrong with the idea of going to school online. It keeps things, I'm thinking, with how dangerous I believe a lot of schools are these days. That it would help students who feel that they can't fit in, or help students that feel that they're being bullied or harmed, that they could go to school online. But see, here's the thing. No matter what we do, it's possible that the spread of infection will eventually stabilize. And I know people say, oh, that's just a stupid way of speaking. You want the economy to, it's just, I've heard it all. But common sense is that any disease, any infection stabilizes, and it does so at a constant level that it becomes present in communities at all times, okay? It's going to be with us at all times, possibly relatively low. Sometimes it'll be predictable. We'll know when it's coming and going. Like right now, they're telling us that the twindemic is going on or that it's raising. Sure, but how many times are we going to be having these forecasts for COVID-19? This is why we need to say now that the disease is endemic. Not a pandemic, but endemic. I mean, some infections are present and they're actively spreading almost everywhere you go. And think about it. There are a lot of sexually transmitted infections and childhood infections like measles or STDs. These things are happening all the time. And what do? To avoid an STD, you are told to wear a condom, or you're told to make sure that you keep clean. But yet, still, with these precautions, people still get, they get the crabs, they get a sexually transmitted. I mean, come on. I mean, look at AIDS. When AIDS happened, HIV infections, they said, practice safe sex and don't share needles. People still did it, and they still got the disease. And it's sad that they did it, and they died. We unfortunately lost a lot of people. But now the disease has become endemic to our society. And so most infections that are endemic in specific parts of the world are taken care of. We don't need to panic. We don't need to throw ourselves in an uproar. We need to use some common sense. And what I'm talking about here, I believe, is common sense. It's not a lie. It's not some agenda. It's just the idea that we need to get on with our lives. It's important. I've always used the example of, let's say, for example, you have a grandma and a grandpa. Grandpa every day wakes up and he looks forward to going to get the mail. The only problem with Grandpa is that he has to use a walker. Still, though, he gets up every day, uses his walker, and what long period of time he takes to walk to that mailbox, he does it every day. Why? Because he enjoys that walk every day. Grandma, on the other hand, likes to play bingo with her friends on the weekends. Yet Grandma has a problem with her back, and it hurts, and she doesn't like the pain, but yet she still goes to her bingo games anyway. So, if Grandma and Grandpa don't mind the pain to go do the things they love, then what's the problem? The situation is knowing what we're knowing now about COVID-19, and we use this example, we'd have to strap them down and give them morphine in order to get through their lives. We don't do that. Why? Because Grandma and Grandpa want to live their lives. They don't want to be lonely, they don't want to be alone, and they would rather die or they'd rather have a lot of pain, and they would do it because it gives them a reason to live. We need to regain our reason to live. It's important that we do this. So, I'm going to explain more about what it means to have something that's endemic to society, get rid of the pandemic, make it endemic, get on with our lives, and this is not a conspiracy theory. This is something I think is very important to talk about today on Channel Zero. Thank you for joining us. We'll be right back with more right here on Channel Zero. Welcome back to Channel Zero. I'm Clyde Lewis, and today we're talking about the difference between endemic and pandemic. And I know that many times we are hearing that we're in the middle of a pandemic. I want to tell you that I think that once we realize how endemic SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 is, I think that we would stop the panic, stop the death tolls, and start thinking about how we're going to effectively control it, how we're going to effectively keep it at bay. And this is something that, like, for example, malaria is endemic to some countries. The measles, if controlled properly, will not become a pandemic. They are endemic to society. There are many diseases like tuberculosis and others that are endemic to our society. And, I mean, theoretically speaking, an infection becomes endemic if, on average, each infected individual transmits it to other person. In other words, we look at something called the R0 factor, and I talked about the R0 factor before. It's called reproduction number. So if we have, for example, the R0 factor of 1, that means it transmits to one other person. If it's an R4, that means it can transfer to 4 people with one contact. So in comparison, during an epidemic, when the spread of the disease is increasing and the R is more than 1, and when the spread is decreasing through control measures and population immunity, we start seeing the R factor fall. And if you ask, this is where we get into some territory where I really get very skeptical about what's going on here. If you ask any of the experts about the herd immunity ratio, many of them won't give it to you. And the reason why they won't give it to you is if they have to confess what that ratio is, then people will say, well, then I need to get infected to make it endemic. And in all seriousness, I know many people don't want to get sick, but the way things are going, you're going to get sick. And you are going to get COVID eventually because COVID is going to become endemic to our society, much like malaria and other diseases that we've been able to control effectively. Just like I said in the last segment, you're not going to be able to cure this with a vaccine. So anybody lining up for a vaccine thinking they're going to be free of COVID are just out of their minds. It doesn't work that way. And they're making you think it works that way, and they're making you think that they have the cure-all, and they're making making you think that if you elect certain people that the cure-all will exist. They're telling you not to trust certain people who may have cure-alls or ways to treat it. But see, that's the thing, is that it's the idea of effectively treating something that we really don't need to worry about. In practice, there are a number of patterns that can be observed in endemic diseases. Some can exist at low levels throughout the year, while others might show periods of higher transmission interspersed with periods of low transmission. Spikes, valleys, peaks, all these things are a part of disease transmission. It happens with the flu, it happens with the cold, it happens with a lot of things. And so, I know that, some diseases, and it's obvious that some diseases, can exist at low levels throughout the year, while others might, have a higher transition level, interspersed with low transmission levels. I mean, this might happen because of the seasons. Now, they were telling us that if the summer came and the temperatures were to heat up, the conditions would be good for COVID-19 to die. Well, apparently that didn't happen. And apparently people went to the beaches, and apparently people went out to rallies, and they went out to protests. But it was really funny how they selectively said that certain groups would get COVID and certain groups wouldn't, namely the protests, basically, because for political reasons, they've been continuing this process of lying to us about who gets it and who doesn't get it. And if you notice that it seems that the media would always be quick to report those who were conservatives getting the disease, and those who are not conservative, they just don't seem to get it. They seem to be foolproof. Doesn't work that way. People are getting COVID-19, and as they're getting it, it's affecting them in many ways. Some people die. But when they tell you it's deadly, that's a misrepresentation as well, because it's not a deadly disease. It is a potentially deadly disease, meaning potentially killing you. Not that it will kill you. Smoking cigarettes can potentially kill you. Overeating can potentially kill you. Eating fatty foods can potentially kill you. It doesn't necessarily kill you, but it can, and it probably will if you don't change your lifestyle. So as long as there are people out there, and this is the thing you need to remember, as long as there are people or a sufficient supply of individuals that still are susceptible to disease, each infected person will pass it on to another person. It's just the way it is. R naught zero means nobody's going to get it. It means the disease has died. It means it's affected enough people. And then, of course, the immunity threshold has been reached. But it's going to continue to spread, bottom line. And so if they keep telling us things like, well, we may be locked down to 2022 or we may be locked down to 2021, they can't continue this. They can't. We cannot continue to live this way unless we start admitting that COVID-19 is endemic to our society. It's no longer a pandemic. It's going to be with us for a while. And if it is, we need to adapt. We need to learn to adapt. We need to learn, it's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is when the mind can adapt to a lifestyle where they are concerned, where it is a choice. If you enter into a building and somebody prefers you wear a mask, then I guess you have to wear a mask. But to continually mandate things like this, to continually mandate lifestyle, to mandate 6 feet apart, to mandate this communist type, go into a store through one entrance and go out through another entrance. These are things that they do in communist countries, and they need to cease it. I can tell you now that many of the countries that are out there, while they still have restrictions, while certain areas do have mandates, they are already old enough and wise enough to know that endemic circumstances are what need to be at least advisable in times like these. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck every year not celebrating Thanksgiving or Halloween or Christmas, that we're not going to have family gatherings. There are no more rock concerts. I was interested the other day that I guess the Flaming Lips did a show where they were all in plastic bubbles and their whole audience was in plastic bubbles. How impractical. Good publicity stunt, but really stupid. We should be able to go to games again. We should be able to go to concerts again. Even when we go to concerts, even when we go to sporting events, we always run the risk of catching something from someone else, whether it be a cold or a flu or some other disease. And the thing about that is that it is irresponsible for someone who's infected to go to work, go to school, and infect other people. And that's the bottom line with any disease. And so if we're used to the endemic idea, then we'll be more aware. And it'll be your choice to be aware. It'll be your choice to either wear a mask or not wear a mask. It won't be mandated and it won't be the law, and you won't be arrested and you won't be treated like some pariah. And so that's the point. It's going to spread. And the thing that needs to be done is we need to supply and replenish the ways that we protect ourselves, depending on the characteristics of the disease. This is very important because the thing is, we don't know about the permanent immunity of COVID, obviously. We don't know what they tell us we don't know about people who don't show symptoms. And we're told that this invisible threat can be spread even if you don't cough or even if you don't sneeze. But then why the precautions when you go into a doctor's office? Why taking your temperature? Why all these precautions? Because if I'm sick and I don't show any symptoms, if I don't have a fever or a cough or a sneeze, then why bother? Well, it's because they want to be extra careful. Well, no, it's called security theater. Wearing a mask is security theater. Taking your temperature is security theater. It's all security theater to keep people thinking, well, if this is the case, if this person has no fever, if this person doesn't cough or sneeze, then they're in the clear. But we've been told they're not in the clear. You understand what I'm trying to say here? It's not feasible. None of it's feasible. And so if we have to, we need to accept that this disease is going to be with us for a long time. We have to accept that it's endemic to our society, that it's endemic to the world, and then we need to start adapting. We need to start getting mentally ready. We don't need to do something called the new normal. This is another, I guess you could call it newspeak for a reset or a new world order or whatever they want to call it. They call it the new normal. This is not normal. It never has been normal. Endemic is normal. If we can put things into perspective and decide that we want to be a society that has COVID as an endemic problem in our lives, then we will deal with it as we deal with any health problem. We donate money to organizations for childhood AIDS or childhood cancer. We donate to organizations that build hospitals for people who are COVID infected or get COVID infected. We should be building hospitals that are COVID sensitive or at least specializing in COVID. If COVID-19 is that serious of a disease, and if it's going to be endemic to our society, then we must start building hospitals like China did. But I can promise you that China is not using those hospitals only for COVID patients. I'm sure they're using them for other diseases and other maladies that may be affecting people. And I think that it needs to be said. You don't need doctors to say that this is going on. It's common sense, okay? It's common sense to say it's time for allowing this to be endemic. I mean, when you're looking at diseases that give only temporary immunity through natural infection, people lose that immune protection to become susceptible again. It happens a lot with a lot of diseases. You get the flu every year. Why? Because you're not always immune to that flu. Flus come and go, and they seem to circulate, and they shed, and they mutate. Not always a bad thing, but sometimes it is a bad thing if things mutate into triggering a cytokine reaction that brings you to a point of pneumonia or some other dread disease. And so that's what I'm saying. I mean, in order to avoid a cold, you drink plenty of fluids, you get plenty of rest, you avoid the cold, and you take care of yourself. Simple. It's common sense. You wash your hands before you handle food. Common sense. You wash your hands after using the toilet. It's common sense. The reason why is because diseases are endemic, and we've managed to, slow the spread of viruses or things that give us infection like hepatitis and other horrible diseases because we keep clean. We learn these things. So, and the reason why is because they've become endemic to our society. And so we've learned to adapt. We've utilized neuroplasticity. We've reprogrammed our minds to be prepared for this. And I think it's time to start having this discussion. And the reason why we're not having the discussion, I can promise you, is because it doesn't sell. And it keeps people afraid, and it keeps those what we call leaders in control. They're not going to release their control, and they're going to dangle this in front of you until you become mentally ill. And that's another thing entirely. Thank you for joining us today. This is Channel Zero. I'm Clyde Lewis, and we'll be back. Welcome back to Channel Zero. I'm Clyde Lewis, and we're talking about common sense with regard to COVID-19. I haven't for the longest time been able to put into words exactly what we need to do. And I've said many times before that we need to adapt, we need to learn to live with each other. But the more I speak about living with each other and cooperating and living our lives, the more you hear that this is a selfish thing to talk about. It's not selfish. It's common sense. It's getting things to work again, having things work normally. They say, you need to be ready for the new normal. I say that none of it's normal. And I think that we need to remember that. I think we need to remember that, sometimes it's worth the pain. There was a story that I had related on my program Ground Zero a while back about in Colorado, I believe, there was a rest home where a group of individuals, octogenarians and septuagenarians, were protesting. They were standing out in front of the rest home or in their wheelchairs, holding signs actually saying it's better to die of COVID than to die of loneliness. And I believe that. I believe that statement. I had a woman call my radio program saying that her parents had brain cancer. Both of them had contracted brain cancer. And she was distraught and crying, saying that she's not able to see them. And the reason why is because they warned about COVID-19 and all this. And I told her, I said, if it were me, I'd see my parents. I would not care. And it's because there are things that are more important, like love and faith, and the things that make us basically human, I believe, that need to be covered here, that we need to talk about. Every time I hear someone say, we follow the science, I'm thinking, is this the science of statistics? Is it the science of consensus? Or is it Bill Nye the Science Guy type of science? This is the type of thing that I worry about, because I think a lot of people believe that they're following science if they follow directions. Yes, they're following a type of science called mind control, mind programming, not learning the facts about how, people with immunity or people with, all these other factors, they need to understand that, we're going to have people who are immune, those who are not immune, that it's going to be endemic to our society like the flu or some other problem, because it's not going away anytime soon. It's the focus, it's the star, it's the spotlight, but take the spotlight off of it, and it's just like any other disease that'll kill us or has the potential to kill us, because I don't want to be footloose and fancy-free about saying that it's a deadly virus when it's potentially deadly, when the recovery rate is at about 96% and the mortality rate is below 1%. I mean, many people have come closer to death with cancers and with other diseases, even the flu, and yet we're making such a big deal out of COVID-19. Another important point is that people with immunity, whether from infection or vaccination, are rarely evenly distributed throughout the community or throughout the country, let alone the world. And so certainly in the case of COVID-19, there are areas that have been relatively spared. We've heard of Sweden, but then again, they're locking down Sweden, or I hear they're locking down Sweden, or they're saying they're locking down Sweden. I don't know, because I've never been to Sweden. In fact, I posted something from the internet off an Instagram of some girl in Sweden that shows that the subways, no masks, that people are sitting together, no big deal. But even with the distribution of vaccines, there's no population immunity. Like, you're not immune from the flu if you get the flu. Even if you've been vaccinated to meet the predicted necessary threshold, you're not going to see COVID-19 going away anytime soon. But if they tell you it's going away, I wouldn't trust that either. I wouldn't trust them if they said, it's gone tomorrow. I wouldn't. If the election happens in November and the asteroid doesn't hit us, they say it's going to hit us, then and they say, miraculously, it's cured, I wouldn't trust it. I wouldn't, because it just seems to me that you have to look at a lot of things. You look at the herd immunity thresholds. You look at the R-naught factors. If they're low enough, the infection then would be under control. The infection would be under control, and that'd be fine. But you look at unprotected pockets, and you look at the R-naught factors being above 1, that's when you should worry. These statistics of deaths and hospitalizations, that's something that once again is endemic to this type of disease. And so we need to look at R-naught factors. We need to look at herd immunity factors. And none of them, nobody, news, experts, epidemiologists are not giving us this. And the reason why is because it gives them more control to tell us to not do this and not do that. And so we start seeing that no matter what you do, whether if you stay indoors or you socially distance or wear a mask, it continues to spread from place to place. That is the bottom line. That is a fact. Even if you wear a mask, even if you decide you want to not even come in contact with society, you can and you will get COVID-19. Unless you, of course, take into consideration adapting and, like I say, neuroplasticity of your brain, getting it programmed to not be so frightened of something, but to get on with your lives. I know that when you look at community spread and you look at how they throw around the word super spreader or patient zero, this is not good either. I've noticed this when they talk about President Trump, or they talk about anyone who goes to a rally, they're super spreaders or they're patient zero. That it just takes away, I believe, the factual nature of what is going on and what we're up against here. But you have to look at interaction. You have to look at population. You have to look at what protections are available, whether they're low enough or high enough to sustain or at least diminish the transmission or diminish the spread. We've held the spread down long enough that it seems to me that the spread it's not been effective holding down the spread, so we have to say it's endemic to our society. We have to admit that. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be in the situation we are now, where we're not having contact or social get-togethers or even social cohesion. And without social cohesion, economy, or anything like that, everything is going to fall apart, and we're going to feel the blade of this against our throats, and it's going to keep us bound. And that's what they want. It just seems to me that that's what the powerful want. They want us to be enslaved, scared, and wanting to know what happens next. Well, I'm going to tell you what happens next. What happens next is what's happening now. Endemic. It is endemic to society. Let's get on with the program. Let's stop acting like a bunch of children afraid of our own shadows. Let's get on with it and understand that we need to be vigilant, but we also not to be so vigilant that we're not living our lives. So, how to deal with COVID-19 once we admit that it's endemic? And it's going to depend on how good our vaccines and treatments are. Plain and simple. If they can protect people from the most severe outcomes, the infection will become manageable. And that's another thing we have to understand, is that once it's manageable, then we have to say that we're willing to take the risk. The flu is manageable. A lot of things are manageable. Pneumonia is manageable if you get it at the right time and you get the right antibiotics to take care of it. COVID-19 will be, and is, like several other diseases, that we have learned to live with and many people experience during their lives. Over-the-counter medications. Take Tylenol, take Advil or whatever to take away the pain and the fever. Get plenty of rest. Drink lots of fluids. Eat lots of soup. Be taken care of. Take care of yourself. Bottom line, these are things we do anyway. And depending on whether immunity, either from natural infection or from vaccination, is permanent or temporary, we may need, yearly vaccine updates. I remember, I don't get vaccines all that much because I just don't feel I need to get them all the time. And I remember when I traveled out of the country, I had to get a few vaccines against certain diseases that I would not ever in my lifetime be immune to. So I got vaccines for that. And then when I had my cancer surgeries, before I went under the knife, they gave me a pneumo vaccine. And I remember how horrible the pneumo vaccine was, and they said, well, it's going to protect you from getting pneumonia probably until you're 72. And I'm thinking, great, then what? And they said, well, you'd have to get a booster. And I've heard rumors I should get a booster anyway, but I'm not going to. But I'm just saying that I have to get a booster to keep that immunity alive. By 72, you're susceptible to a lot of things, whether it be the flu or something. And they're saying that, in your 70s now, if you get COVID-19, you could die. Well, I could get pneumonia at 72 and die. I could get, pneumonia at 56 and die. I don't think about that. But if you're told to think about it all the time, chances are your fears and your neuroses are going to kill you. That's called pointing the bone. I remember Michael Crichton did a speech about saying that a lot of people who are doomsayers with regard to climate change, the more you tell people they're going to die, and if they're wearing a lab coat or have a clipboard, they tell you you're going to die, then you're going to die because you believe what they have to say and you constantly listen to what they have to say. If vaccines not only prevent clinical disease, but strongly reduce transmission and confer long-lasting immunity, we can also see other scenarios happening here, such as the potential of eradication of the disease. But realistically, it's unlikely. And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but no, it's not going to happen. Eradication is difficult. It's always been difficult with all kinds of, even for diseases that we've almost perfected, or at least we think eliminated, like smallpox and polio. We can say, or if we have the ability to say, permanent immunity, but endemic diseases, more or less the outcome I believe is going to happen. So anyway, I'm Clyde Lewis. This is Channel Zero. We want to thank you for joining us today for Channel Zero, and hopefully we'll make this a common thing where we'll be able to do this more often. I'll have these chats with you aside from what I do with Ground Zero. Remember, Ground Zero is on all over the country from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Pacific time. You can catch us on Aftermath.fm and Aftermath.media for $9.99. You can get all of the archive shows and our library access, $4.99 for just the archive shows. Remember, Aftermath.media and Aftermath.fm.